Latin America and the Caribbean with several social programs. Let's review some of its achievements in the framework of its anniversary.
In education, ALBA TCP reached a historic milestone by making more than 4,980,000 people in Latin America literate. Countries such as Venezuela, Bolivia, and Nicaragua were declared illiteracy-free territories. With the creation of Misión Milagro in 2004, promoted by commanders Hugo Chavez and Fidel Castro, over 7 million people in the region have had free treatment for ocular pathologies, while 40 million have received corrective lenses for vision. Central America is among the ones that benefit from Misión Milagro, with almost 500,000 people who had surgery. 11,900 Mexicans also benefit from this program. In the Caribbean, more than 1,300,000 people underwent eye surgery. In South America, over 4,200,000 citizens underwent surgery for eye conditions. The creation of PetroCaribe in 2004 within the framework of ALBA TCP led to multilateral cooperation between Caribbean countries and Venezuela, an alliance that allowed the purchase of Venezuelan oil under preferential payment conditions and the financing for the construction of tankers, oil pipelines, and hydropower plants in the Caribbean. Given the suspension of PetroCaribe in 2019 due to US sanctions against Venezuela, ALBA TCP member countries pledged a developed plan to relaunch this international bloc. During 2 decades, the Bolivarian Alliance has not only developed social programs in the areas of health, education, and energy, but has also created opportunities for cooperation in sports, and more than 10,000 athletes have participated in several ALBA TCP games.
Thousands of people rallied on Thursday along the streets of Paris to demand for jobs following a call from the General Confederation of Labor, the Solidaire, and the Fédération Syndicale Unitaire. The demonstrations takes place in the context of an upsurge in redundancy plans that might result in around 200,000 employees losing their jobs.
The CGT has been alerting us since May about the numerous redundancy plans underway, but we were not being listened to. We warned again last September, including the newly appointed Prime Minister, about 180 redundancy plans, and still, there was no response. Today, the situation has worsened, as according to the CGT's count last week, there were 286 redundancy plans. We are now over 300. This represents roughly 200,000 employees in the country who risk losing their jobs, both directly and indirectly.
Today, this low-intensity privatization and the breakup of freight are being implemented. It's our responsibility to warn the public, first and foremost because our working conditions are at stake, and we care deeply about this. I won't downplay the importance of it, but I also believe the public needs to understand that what's happening is significant. The privatization of the SNCF is no small matter. It's not just an epiphenomenon.
In Brazil, doctors describe as successful the procedure reform of Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva intended to prevent cranial hemorrhage. The doctors at the Syrian Lebanese hospital where the operation was performed assured that the president is stable and is expected to make a speedy recovery. According to the medical team, the head of state should return to Brazil at the beginning of next week. Furthermore, they also point out that the president is forbidden by medical order to receive working visitors at the hospital.
The procedure has just finished. It started at 7:10 in the morning, and at 7:15 the procedure had finished. It was a complete success to embolize the artery. The doctor will give a report later on. This has already been discussed and talked about, but the important fact is
Caracas hosts the 25th edition of the World Forum on Special Economic Zones with the participation of international guests focused on the transition to new economic models. In this context, this Thursday, Chinese economic experts will discuss about the Belt and Road Initiative and will share their experiences with the Venezuelan delegations. During the meeting, both parties will focus on the strengthening of the industrial innovation between Beijing and Caracas. This meeting takes place within the framework of the unilateral coercive measures taken by the U.S. against Venezuela's economy. The Executive Vice President Leslie Rodriguez highlighted that the special economic zones in China accounts for 70% of exports in the Asian country.
China's special zones contribute 70% to exports, which means that the economic zone has had the objective of promoting exports. the export engine as we know it. And Venezuela is also giving an important boost to it today.
Likewise, the vice president remarked that in the last 5 years, Venezuela has worked on economic recovery in spite of the destabilizing attempts of the extreme right wing.
This is the greatest strength that Venezuela has, and we have proved it these last 5 years with the Economic Recovery Program, which has a political foundation, which consists of political peace for economic development, which is political stability, guaranteeing at all costs that extremist factors do not lead Venezuela to situations of violence that disturb peace, since peace is the main factor for growth and for development. And this growth and this development are precisely for equality and social justice.
Also in Venezuela, the Vice Presidency for Citizen Security and Peace informs that the country that in the last 72 hours, 103 people have been released from prison in addition to the 225 precautionary measures granted on November the 26th of this year. Such measures are in response to the request made by President Nicolás Maduro Moros to the bodies of the justice system to review all the cases concerning acts of violence and crimes committed in the framework of the July 28th elections, promoted by fascist and extremist sectors at national and international level that seeks to disturb the peace of Venezuela. The Bolivarian Alliance for the Peoples of our America's Peoples Trade Treaty, or ALBA TCP, proposed a series of projects that will be carried out to improve the quality of lives of the peoples and to overthrow the commercial hegemony of the United States. Let's see.
In the economic sphere, ALBA TCP announced the creation of a single virtual currency that will operate through a regional monetary council to reduce the dominance of the US dollar in Latin America and facilitate trade between the member countries of the bloc. In the banking area, the members reaffirmed their commitment to make the ALBA Bank the financial powerhouse of the bloc, whose goal will be to prioritize the financing of projects for the social development of the peoples, as well as to assist those who need it most. In addition, the ALBA bloc proposes the creation of a Council for Human Rights, made up of experts from each region to protect the rights of the Latin American and Caribbean population through educational and awareness programs, as well as to support the most vulnerable communities in the continent. With these projects, ALBA TCP is committed to building a fairer, more equitable, and sovereign region, with the aim of improving the quality of life of the peoples and promoting a sustainable development based on solidarity.
And in Syria, Israeli military forces are taking advantage of the takeover of the government by terrorist groups, furthermore advancing into Syrian territory in violation of the national sovereignty. To give us more insight of the current situation, we welcome Barton Al-Sharif, who is a member of the Association Against Zionism and Racism in Jordan. Hello, Barton. What can you tell us about the Israeli offensive on Syrian grounds? What do these events mean for Syrian current situation?
Good evening. To understand the situation in Syria, first we have to understand that Syria is under war and sanctions since 13 years. During this 13 years, Syria suffered from a siege, economic siege and sanctions from the United States in a massive way, and they suffered from a massive inflation. They lost the currency rate, exchange rate, and the economic situation was very bad for 13 years. And they've been under crush from the United States and the opposition supported by the CIA for all these years, with mostly all the neighboring countries fighting Syria economically and militarily by supporting the fighters against the government. So in this 13 years, it's just like what they did with Iraq. Exactly after 13 years of sanctions and siege, they invaded Iraq. Now they are doing the same thing, but they are using these terrorist groups that they call opposition to take Syria down. And I'm not talking about the regime, I'm talking about the state, the country of Syria is collapsing now. People, after all these years of sanctions and suffering, people were starving. The United States, with conspiracy with the Kurds in the east part, taking over 90% of the oil and gas fields, which makes Syria unable to provide even electricity and gasoline and cooking gas to the people. And this put lots of pressure on the Syrian government and the Syrian people in all over Syria. So we have to understand that what happened after long suffering, 13 years of stood standing for the Syrian people and the government. And at the end, we saw all this tragedy happening in our bare eyes, because what happened in Syria exactly is a military coup happened from inside the regime of Syria. This movement, of course, of the leaders of the military of Syrian army happened with the conspiracy with different countries, United States, Zionist entity, Turkey, and maybe other countries play a big role in introduction in Syria, in introduction in the military association in Syria to work on this movement to surrender the country and abandon Syria for the terrorist groups. And they are very violent groups, extremist, jihadists, committed lots of crimes in Syria during all these years. Massive massacres, ethnic cleansing against specific ethnic groups and the religious groups in Syria. Uh, we faced a long civil war. Uh, I can compare between the sanctions on Syria and what happened in Venezuela about losing the value of the currency of the country, not being able to export and import products. And they have this situation of uh, losing the ability to provide the people with basic needs, especially after losing the oil and gas fields in the east part of Syria.
And I want to ask you about the influence of Western powers in the region. How does the role of the U.S. government and its allies weigh on the current geopolitical situation in the Middle East?
Syria has lots of allies, and the other camp of the United States also they have their own allies. The United States, since 2011, announcing that they are supporting the militias against the Syrian country, and the Zionist entity also announced that they were supporting the Syrian militias with medical support. They received injured people from the terrorist groups in their hospitals. They've been visited by Benjamin Netanyahu himself in the north of Palestine to make sure that they are taking a good service of medical service to go back to Syria and fight the army. All of this support from the United States and the Zionist entity and Turkey from the north are very clear and announced. They are proud of supporting these terrorist groups and announcing it. So Syria is part of the axis of resistance. We can't say that Syria is alone. Syria is part of this alliance, including Iran, Iraq, the resistance in Iraq, the resistance in Lebanon, Palestine, and recently Yemen. What the United States and the Zionist entity faced since the 7th of October 2023 is a unity of fronts against the Zionist entity. Rockets and drones coming from the resistance in Lebanon, in Syria, from Iraq, from Iran, and from Yemen, plus the front in Palestine, in West Bank, and the Gaza Strip. So what the Zionist entity worked on is to dismantling the unification of the fronts. This unification put the Zionist entity in a bad situation, taking rockets and drones from east and west and north and south. So they work on opening a open war on Lebanon, massive war on Lebanon, destroying part of the Hezbollah military bases and abilities. Plus, was the big hit is killing the leaders of the resistance in Lebanon, assassination of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, playing a big role in the stopping the front in Lebanon. After 2 months of open war on Lebanon and destroying and bombing airstrikes, after less than 24 hours of stopping the front in Lebanon, they initiate the movement against Syria, against Aleppo at the beginning, all the way to Damascus. So this attach us to the unification of the fronts and the working on dismantling this unification, dealing with each front aside, and unfortunately they succeeded in Syria and Lebanon under the huge military pressure from the Air Force of the Zionist entity, which is the biggest Air Force supported by the United States with the latest technology.
Thank you very much, Bandar. But suddenly we must take a break. Thank you for being with us.